Tonight at 10, Dominic Raab's future as Deputy Prime Minister hangs in the balance. An independent report into allegations of bullying has now been passed on to Rishi Sunak, whose decision on his close colleague's future is now awaited.
Plenty here had expected the Prime Minister's verdict by now, but we are still waiting. Rishi Sunak is confronted by a big judgment call: sack his deputy or keep him.
Yes, we'll have the latest from Chris Mason at Westminster on the future of one of the government's most controversial figures. Also tonight, criminal charges are dropped against the Hollywood actor Alec Baldwin for his involvement in the fatal shooting of a colleague on set. In Sudan, people flee the endless violence as military factions battle for overall control.
Ignition, 2, 1.
In Texas, the most powerful space rocket ever built takes off, but minutes later, the unmanned craft explodes into pieces.
Delivered some work which he didn't think was at the standard it should have been. He would tear it apart.
Have you always behaved professionally, Mr. Raab?
Few dispute Dominic Raab arriving here in Downing Street the other day as a taskmaster is demanding, but he has always denied bullying. Tonight, limbo, as Westminster waits.
Dominic is a friend of mine, and I have the highest regard for him and his professionalism. I know that this report has been handed over to the Prime Minister. I know the Prime Minister will be reading it, reflecting on it, and we will have a decision later.
Inside number 10, I'm told the Prime Minister is carefully considering the findings of what those who have seen it describe as a detailed report before coming to judgment. Plenty at Westminster are astonished, having been told this morning we'd know the outcome by now. What do you make of this?
It's a farce, and it's just extraordinary. Can you imagine being one of the civil servants sitting in the Ministry of Justice today, who's been waiting to find out the outcome of the complaints that you've made against the Deputy Prime Minister of the country, to then be told that you're going to have to wait another day? I mean, it's just a complete farce of a system.
Dominic Raab has been a Cabinet Minister for much of the last 5 years. He faced 8 formal complaints about his behaviour involving at least 24 people. Dozens more gave evidence to the inquiry as witnesses. There were complaints from his time as Justice Secretary, Brexit Secretary and Foreign Secretary.
One of our viewers has emailed us to ask, is Dominic Raab a bully? Are you?
No.
You're confident in that?
Yes.
Can you imagine any situation where any of the officials you worked with might have gone home at the end of the day and felt that your behaviour had been unacceptable?
Well, I hope not.
Prime Minister, I think...
Last month on BBC Breakfast, Rishi Sunak was asked how he would handle this moment.
If it finds that he's behaved badly, would you sack him?
I think, again, people can judge me by my actions, right? When there was, in the past, when there's been issues like this, I've made sure that they were investigated properly.
Opposition parties claim the Prime Minister deciding not to decide, yet proves he is weak.
If he's a bully, he should go. And the Prime Minister really should be able to read the report, make up his mind and get on with it. Stop dithering and delaying and summon up your courage and sack your deputy if he's a bully. Because this is not what the people elected him for.
Tonight, this man, a former independent advisor to government on ministers' interests, told us why he thought there was a delay.
In some ways, you can understand if it's a huge report, the Prime Minister may want time to consider it. But, I mean, as far as I can see, it probably can't be completely clear-cut. Otherwise, he would have come out with a decision one way or the other this afternoon.
The Deputy Prime Minister's future hangs in the balance tonight as the Prime Minister works out what to do.
Let's go back to Westminster and talk to Chris there. Do you think, Chris, that there will be a decision by tomorrow? And what do you think is at stake here, not just for Mr Raab, obviously, but for Mr Sunak as well?
Well, the clock is ticking for the Prime Minister, Huw, because Downing Street have indicated for some time that they would crack on with delivering a verdict, and there was a widespread expectation, as I say, from many of those directly involved in this process that they would get an outcome today. Now, clearly, if it were to come tomorrow, that isn't a considerable delay, and those around the Prime Minister say there are other things in his diary today. that did demand his attention. But let's look tonight at what we do and don't know. We know that the Prime Minister has seen this report. We know that the Deputy Prime Minister has seen this report. We know the two of them have not spoken today. And we also know the Deputy Prime Minister has not resigned. So the decision lies full square with Rishi Sunak about what he's going to do. And it is a difficult one, whatever is in that report. Tonight, there are those who had made complaints, who are deeply, deeply concerned, working perhaps in the Ministry of Justice, where Dominic Raab is the Secretary of State, that were he to survive, their political boss would still be there. And they would find that very uncomfortable. They find this limbo very uncomfortable. One word used by one person tonight, fearing a whitewash in this report. But let's also be clear, there's a lot of speculation. Very few people have actually seen this report. We should reserve judgment, as the Prime Minister currently is, until we get to see it. But the political jeopardy for the Prime Minister is this. If he sacks his deputy, there'll be questions about why he was appointed in the first place. He will have to reshuffle his government to at least a degree. If he doesn't, there'll be big questions asked about, in particular, how one department, the Ministry of Justice, can function without some sort of reshuffle of civil servants. So, quite a moment, a big call to come for the Prime Minister.
Indeed, Chris. Many thanks again. Chris Mason there with the latest thoughts there at Westminster. Now, within the past hour, some news from New Mexico, where prosecutors have dropped criminal charges against the actor Alec Baldwin over the fatal shooting of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins on the set of the movie Rust. But there is still a separate civil lawsuit against Mr. Baldwin and the producers of the film. Our correspondent Sophie Long is in Los Angeles. Sophie, bring us up to date with what's been going on and the reaction to the developments.
Well, this, of course, follows the tragic death of 42-year-old Halyna Hutchins on the set of Rust. She was the cinematographer. They were in a rehearsal when Alec Baldwin had been holding a gun that discharged what we now know to be a live round that hit the director, Joel Souza, and killed Halyna Hutchins. Now, in the aftermath of her death, the filming of Rust ceased. Now, today, on the day that filming was due to resume, not in New Mexico but in Montana, we heard from Alec Baldwin's lawyers that the criminal charges of involuntary manslaughter that Alec Baldwin was facing would be dropped. Now, we heard that from his lawyers, who said that they were very pleased to hear that these charges would be dropped, and they're now encouraging a proper investigation into the facts and circumstances surrounding this tragic accident. Now, those are the criminal charges that have been dropped. We have not yet heard from the prosecutors in New Mexico, nor have we been given a reason for why those charges have been dropped. But as you point out, there's been a slew of civil cases brought against both Alec Baldwin and the producers of the film Rust, of which he is one. Matthew Hutchins, Halyna Hutchins' husband, settled with Alec Baldwin and the producers last year. He is indeed now an executive producer on the film of Rust that has been resumed. But Halyna Hutchins' family in Ukraine, her mother and sister, are also suing Alec Baldwin and the producers, and that case remains outstanding.
Sophie, thanks again for the update there in Los Angeles. Sophie Long, our correspondent. Now, the turmoil and suffering in Sudan are getting more acute by the day. The latest fighting started nearly a week ago between rival military factions. It so far claimed at least 350 lives. Civilians in the capital, Khartoum, who are trapped between the factions, are running low on food and supplies, and some have started taking water from the River Nile because access to fresh water is becoming very difficult. Our correspondent Andrew Harding in Johannesburg is monitoring the latest developments.
Another sunrise over Khartoum, but still no sign of the promised ceasefire in Sudan's shell-shocked capital. Across this vast country, hospitals are increasingly overwhelmed. These, the victims of a power struggle between two rival armies, a war that's being waged in crowded cities with no regard for civilian life. Doctors can't even reach many of the wounded.
Our volunteers didn't feel safe to go and to provide service apart from hospitals that are very close to their home area so far. But we are waiting for a situation to allow us to go there and to provide service to all needy people, including wounded people.
Many families are trying to escape from Khartoum, but the airport remains closed, and there are growing reports of marauding soldiers, of looting. It's hard for journalists to get into Sudan right now, but my colleague Mohammed Osman lives in Khartoum and for the first time in a week ventured out of his house today.
I'm here at the bus station in Khartoum. Spread people trying to leave the city. The fighting hasn't stopped for the 6 days. They are running for water and food.
New footage here of 2 army helicopters flying low over the River Nile. These images filmed by a British businessman who's still trapped in the city centre.
The buildings have been obliterated and pounded continuously.
How far away? Just metres away.
Yeah.
And is that ongoing? Because we hear talk of a ceasefire or attempts to get a humanitarian ceasefire.
There is no ceasefire. It's talk. It's all talk.
On the edges of Khartoum, the occasional hint of normal life. For years, people here have been hoping and pushing for democracy. Instead, 2 generals staged a coup, then turned on each other, and now they risk plunging a huge and unstable corner of Africa into deeper turmoil. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Johannesburg.
As Andrew was saying there, the focus of this latest phase of Sudan's troubles is the conflict between 2 military leaders who are battling for outright control. Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams is here to tell us what's at stake. Paul.
Huw, what do we know about the 2 military men at the centre of this crisis? General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, a former warlord known as Hemeti. Both served under the previous president, Omar al-Bashir, until they turned on him in 2019 after months of pro-democracy protests. They have large numbers of troops at their disposal. General al-Burhan has the regular military, around 120,000 strong, while Hemeti has the rapid support forces, as many as 150,000, with a fearsome reputation for violence. Why are they fighting now? Well, they were both part of a transitional administration that was supposed to pave the way for a democratic government. But in 2021, General Burhan staged a military coup, putting all of that on hold. Last year, there was another agreement on transition, but by now, the 2 men had become rivals, unable to agree on how their armed forces can be merged into a single military. There are economic interests too, especially gold. It's the country's biggest export, and Hemeti's family has a big stake in it. And it has strategic importance too. A lot of that gold goes to the United Arab Emirates. And Russia's Wagner Group, which has fighters in Ukraine, has lucrative mining interests too. Very useful for the Kremlin. Sudan is Africa's 3rd biggest country. What happens there matters to its neighbours and to the wider world. Russia, the United States, Saudi Arabia, lots of countries are vying for influence and watching nervously to see if civil war is about to erupt.
Paul, many thanks. Paul Adams there, our diplomatic correspondent. Now, the most powerful space rocket ever built, the unmanned SpaceX Starship, has blown up shortly after launch in Texas. It was the 2nd attempted launch this week, after the first was called off on Monday because of some technical problems. The SpaceX founder, Elon Musk, welcomed what he called an exciting test launch and said there would be another in a few months. SpaceX hopes that the rocket will eventually lead to an era of interplanetary travel. Our science editor, Rebecca Morell, has more details.
A tense wait in the final seconds.
Ignition, 2, 1.
As the biggest and most powerful rocket ever built gets ready to fly.
We have liftoff.
Starship slowly pushed up into the sky. So far, so good.
Propulsion reports first stage engines nominal. What a sight!
A few minutes into the flight, it was time for the lower part of the rocket to separate. But multiple engines failed and Starship lost height. It began to tumble. So the rocket's flight termination system was activated.
Starship just experienced a rapid unscheduled disassembly or a run during ascent. But now this was a development test. There's a first test flight of Starship, and the goal was to gather the data and, as we said, clear the pad and get ready to go again.
Despite the explosion, they were still celebrating at SpaceX HQ. Elon Musk, the company's CEO, set expectations low. Just getting the rocket off the ground was a major milestone. He tweeted, "Congrats, SpaceX team, on an exciting test launch of Starship. Learned a lot for the next test launch in a few months." The plan for Starship is to land people on the moon in a joint mission with NASA and then to eventually go to Mars. It's radically different from other rockets. This is the Starship launch system. It stands 120 metres tall. That's nearly 400 feet. It has two main parts. At the bottom is the Super Heavy booster, which has a huge number of engines, 33 of them. Above this is a Starship spacecraft. This can carry cargo or crew. SpaceX says up to 100 people. What's unique is both components will be fully reusable. Explosions at SpaceX aren't unusual. They say it's all part of the learning process.
There's been a lot of develop and fly, design and fly. That's been costly in terms of hardware failures. SpaceX has said that it's been extremely valuable in terms of what SpaceX has learned.
There are concerns about Starship's environmental impact on the fragile local ecosystem. The US authorities, though, say it's passed all their checks. It's not yet clear exactly what went wrong, and SpaceX won't say how much it cost. But what's certain is they'll try again, and they have the rockets lined up, ready to fly. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News.
Now, just about 10:20, let's have a look at some of the other stories making the news today. In Yemen, at least 78 people have been killed in a crush at a school in the rebel-held capital Sana'a during a charity event for Ramadan. Reports say that the guards fired shots, causing people to panic and to rush for the exits. The environmental campaign group Just Stop Oil has refused to rule out disrupting the London Marathon on Sunday. Earlier today, the protest group Extinction Rebellion said it would be respecting the event and it would help to protect the race because of the huge charity effort involved. Family, friends and lots of dogs too have been paying their respects to the presenter and entertainer Paul O'Grady, whose funeral took place today. Not only for his alter ego Lily Savage, but also as a keen supporter of Battersea Dogs and Cats Home. The broadcaster was laid to rest near his home in Aldington in Kent. Thousands of disabled children and young people are at risk of losing millions of pounds of savings, which are held in their child trust funds. The funds were opened for all those born between 2002 and 2011. It was a scheme promoted by the Labour government. But the BBC has learned that more than 80,000 families with children who lack the capacity to make financial decisions are faced with a complex and often costly process to access the money. Our Disability News correspondent Nikki Fox has the story.
Two brothers, both have savings accounts. When Thomas turns 18, he'll be able to access his money pretty much straight away. But Harry won't.
Yay, well done!
Ramandeep opened a child trust fund for Harry because it gave young people a starting pot of between £250 and £500, which the family topped up over time.
I did the same for all three of my boys, but Harry doesn't have the mental capacity to understand what he's signing for. Hence, he will now not be able to access his money unless I go to court.
That's the Court of Protection, a long legal process involving a whole load of paperwork, but it's the only way she'll be able to access Harry's savings.
It's a very rigid process, and if you make any mistakes at any point, you have to stop and start again.
They don't need this added complication.
Every year, thousands of families contact Phillips law firm, often stressed and confused.
These families have been managing their own money for quite some time via the DWP benefit scheme, so please, government, introduce a simplified process to enable these families to access money that they've actively saved for themselves.
So this is copies of the Court of Protection, the original application.
It took nearly a year and cost around £1,000, but Michelle now has access to the £7,500 saved in her daughter Alana's trust fund.
Keep going, a bit more.
But with that comes a problem she wasn't expecting. Michelle has now become what's known as a deputy, which means she has a lifelong legal duty to report how she spends Alana's savings and benefits.
There's so much paperwork here. And what would you say to other families that might contact you?
If you can leave the money where it is, and hopefully things will change one day, I would do that. Because otherwise it's a long, bureaucratic and expensive process that you probably wish you'd never started.
Wow. I'm so torn because ultimately I want Harry to have access to his money.
The Ministry of Justice says it's simplifying the process and that court fees were being waived in the majority of cases. This is what Harry wants to spend his savings on.
So if you could do anything in the whole world for the rest of your life, it would be Bollywood?
Yes. Yeah. It's Harry's money, let him spend it, let him enjoy what he's got, just like his siblings are able to do.
Nikki Fox, BBC News.
Now, by the end of the month, India will replace China as the world's most populous country. That's according to the latest analysis by the United Nations. China's population is expected to be 1.425 billion by this summer. On the other hand, India's population will have grown to 1.428 billion. That's 3 million more, taking it past its neighbour. Now, since the turn of the 20th century, it's been a rather fascinating rise, with India catching up after the 1950s here, and the birth rate in China, partly because of that one-child policy, slowing down. Now, the populations of both countries are projected to peak and then to start to decline during this century. From Mumbai, our correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher has sent this report.
Job hunting in Mumbai. They've travelled hundreds of miles, seeking a spot on the police force. Just getting in for the test is a competition. India's got the largest number of young workers in the world.
What I find incredible is that all of these people have come out for what is actually not that many jobs. Police have told us there are 650,000 applicants and only 8,000 positions.
Third time lucky. Sumit is praying that this will be his chance.
If I get this job, my life will change because I'll receive a fixed income. I'll have job security. I'll be able to get married.
If he doesn't get it, he'll still move here. The city is where the opportunities are. Like Sumit, many others are fleeing rural areas. This is the life they want to leave behind. Here, they just can't make enough money. So the flow to urban centers continues, transforming megacities like Mumbai. This is a deeply unequal society. It's difficult to improve conditions for all India's people, even though its economy is growing at a fast pace. On the outskirts of Mumbai, this suburb has expanded by 200% in the past 20 years. Migrants from across the country hope this is the start of something better. In some ways, life is harder here, but there are also new freedoms. Ranjana followed her husband to the city to cook for him. But she found work too, and that's made a huge difference to her.
I can buy myself what I want. I can buy myself a sari, or I can get something that my child needs. I no longer need to depend on my husband for everything.
Ranjana moved here 10 years ago. She's hoping this will open up a better future for her son. The doors of opportunity are entered with both hope and desperation. There are daunting challenges. But in India's massive population, huge potential. Barbara Platt-Usher, BBC News, Mumbai.
Let's catch up with some football news. Manchester United were beaten pretty well in the Europa League tonight, losing 3-0 to Sevilla to go out of the competition 5-2 on aggregate. On the other hand, it was a great night for West Ham. They're through to the semi-finals of the Europa Conference League, having beaten Ghent 4-1 this evening. Joe Linsky was watching.
In this competition, this is the place. Sevilla saved their best for the Europa League. They've won this trophy 6 times this century. Manchester United would have... This was West Ham United's Europa Conference League quarter-final.
Right, it's 29 minutes past 10. Time for a look at the weather. And Louise is with me. Hi, Louise.
Hi there, Huw. Snow on the mountaintop, sunshine in the sky as well. Yet again, another beautiful day in the far northwest of Scotland. We've seen temperatures in the high teens all week. 19 degrees, highest temperature today. But it was a different story once again across that east coast. On North Norfolk, we saw just 10 degrees at 50 Fahrenheit. And eventually, we had some rain as well. Now, the rain is starting to ease away a little, but it's set to return overnight tonight. So you can see how isolated, but fairly heavy for a time, it was down through the southeast of England. Now, that is going to produce quite a lot of cloud through the night, and then towards dawn, more wet weather to come. Clearer skies further north and east, a touch of frost once again in Scotland. Might see temperatures down in rural parts as low as -3. So frosty for eastern Scotland, wet once again for eastern England. That rain stretching through Lincolnshire over into Wales. We'll also see some wet weather across the Channel coast as well. And as that eases away, a pile of showers will be pushing in off the North Sea with that brisk easterly wind once again. So anywhere really from sort of North Yorkshire, north of that, beautiful once again. Scotland, Northern Ireland, parts of Northern England as well. And temperatures will reflect the 16 or 17 degrees, but once again, along those exposed east coasts and generally through England and Wales, it's going to be cool, breezy and showery. Now, as we go into the weekend, I'm afraid it's going to be a bit of a mess for the start of Saturday. Weather fronts both across Northern England and down to the south, really acting like a sandwich. In between the two, there will be some sunshine, but just getting the detail right of where the rain is going to be on Saturday, you might just need to keep abreast of the forecast. It is subject to change, but certainly once again Scotland will see a good deal of sunshine. Not quite as warm, 9 to 13 degrees in the far north, 12 to 14, and that cooler trend is set to continue for Sunday. Huw.
OK, thanks very much once again. That's BBC News at 10 on Thursday the 20th of April. More analysis coming up for you on the day's main stories. That's over on BBC Two with Newsnight, which is being presented tonight by Victoria, who will be in the studio any minute now. And here on BBC One, all of our news teams in the nations and regions standing by with the news where you are. And happily, they are in the studios. So from all of us here on the 10, good night.